going to finish off chapter 8. So I know some of this is like kind of taking a drink from a fire hose, it's like a sip where it's all comes at once. But that's why we provide, you can go back to the YouTube channel, watch it again. It's little bit by little bit, so, but when you're finished, it says, that it was like sweet as honey on their lips, and sweet as honey because they were then able to proclaim it, and that's what they're told to do. And we'll start here. So I want to look first of all at these two timelines we've been talking about, 1,656 years and 2,484 years. So that's the timeline from Adam to the Ark of Noah, and the 1656, which we saw was representative of the weekly Sabbath, and the 2,484 years, which we're saying is representative of the yearly Sabbath. We'll take a little closer look at that. Observed times. Remember it said in Genesis on the fourth day that this time was meant to serve and mark the appointed times. So note from Adam to the Ark of Noah is 1,656 years, and from the Ark of Noah to the atoning ministry of Jesus is 2,484 years. I want to show you something. So this is a 24-hour clock. And we know it's 360 degrees. So note that at 0.69 or 69%, so we just take 69% of this 360 degrees, or 0.69 of the total. That's exactly 16.56 hours. And that's also exactly 69% of 360 is 248.4 degrees. So as we go to 69% of observed time, we get 16.56 hours, which occurs exactly at 248.4 degrees. What are our timelines again? We look up here, 1656, 2484. Let's carry this a little bit further so we can really understand it. This relationship never changes. 6.9 days, so this is 0.69 in 1 day. If we take 6.9 days, it's 165.6 hours. 6.9 times 24 is 160. If you want to get your calculator out right now, take it out right now. Take 6.9 times 24 is 165.6. Now take that same 6.9 and times 360. And what do you get? 2484. So every 6.9 days, there's a 2,484 degree rotation, or observation. So again, it doesn't change. This relationship always remains the same, about 69, 6.9, 0.69. Every 6.9 days, the sun's apparent travel across the sky is observed as 2,484 traverse, this journey. The relationship between 6.9 days and all of its multiples, 0.69, 6.9, 69, 690, occurring at exactly 1656, and all of its multiples, 16.56, 165.6, 1656, 16560, of observed units of time, hours, days, years, and precisely at 2,484 degrees in all of its multiples, 24.84, 2484, 24840, of the observed apparent 360 degree rotational traverse of the sun remains constant. While this can be observed by all, we have been given the revelation from the Lord through the worship pattern given to Moses that the seventh day, the year 7 times 7 Jubilee, is the appointed Sabbath rest of the Lord and sign of his covenant. The prophet Daniel and others, Moses, for example, talking about 40 days of wandering is going to be 40 years in the desert, etc. But the prophet Daniel and others, Moses have revealed that the Lord appointed a length of a prophetic year as 360 days. We have further observed that 69 units, hours, days, years of observed solar time is exactly equal to 70 of the same units hours, days, years of prophetic 360-day year times. Therefore, he says, coming to a conclusion, the 1,656 years of the ark timeline from Adam to the ark of Noah is equal to 1,680 prophetic years. This points us to the observance of the weekly seventh-day Sabbath. How many hours in 70 days? 1,680. Just as there are 165.6 hours in 6.9 days, which is 24 times 6.9, and 168 hours in a 7-day week, 24 times 7, as there is 1,656 hours in 69 days and 1,680 in 70 days. The 1,656 observed years from Adam to Noah is 1,680 in prophetic time. Now here's the one I really want to focus on. The 2,484 years in the mercy seat timeline from Ark of Noah to the 20 ministry of Jesus is equal to 2,520 prophetic years. Remember I told you how to convert that? Take 2,484, divide by 6.9 times 7 is equal to 2,520 prophetic years. This points us to the 7th year Sabbath, where 2,520 years is exactly 360 times 7. Just take 2,520 divided by 7. It's 360. So these covenant fulfillment events occur in direct accord to the Sabbath. I mean, just picture this. The exact time from the Ark of Noah to the ministry of Jesus is exactly equal to 7 prophetic years. 2,520 days, 2,520 years. It's exactly then. And, what is the Sabbath? And what's supposed to happen on the 7th year? The land is supposed to get rest. You've had now in 7 years, if you're observing 360-day years, that means you have a full year of Sabbath observations. In other words, every 7th day, 1 day out of every 7. At the end of 7 years, you're going to have 360 days of Sabbath you've observed. And so that year is set aside and no work is to be done. But the long and short of it is, these events aren't just random times. This you can see clear and clear. The 1656, the 2044, really, when you convert those to prophetic time, they're all fulfilled exactly in keeping with the Sabbath. Exactly. So they're all, because the Sabbath is the foundation for the covenant, and the fulfillment of the covenant is related to the Sabbath. And so each of these events, God caused to happen an exact fulfillment to what he told us to observe in the pattern, to the Sabbath, to the holy days, the Day of Atonement of the 7th month of the 10th day, the Jubilees. He caused these to be observed in the world, what he revealed to us in the pattern. Let me just show you that a little bit more here. So here's that whole box that we looked at before with the 1656, the 2044, the time from Adam to Enoch, from Enoch to Noah, from Noah to Moses, from Moses to Jesus, the 4,140 years, etc. In fact, every covenant event, so all these are covenant events, that we have observed thus far can be divided by 69, which also means that each of these events can be divided by 70 prophetic years observed. So the first one, Adam to Enoch, 621 years divided by 6.9 equals 90 observed. So there's 96.9 years until Enoch, 90. And then 621 equals 630 prophetic. Well, 630 divided by 7 equals 90 Sabbaths, 90 prophetic Sabbaths. Enoch to the Ark of Noah, 1,035 years divided by 6.9 is 150 observed. While 1,035 observed equals 1,050 prophetic, 1,050 divided by 7 is 150 Sabbaths. So between, and then when you add them both together, so this is from Adam to Enoch, and then from Enoch to Noah. From Adam to Noah, is 1656 divided by 6.9 equals 240 observed, which is the 90 plus 150. 1656 equals 1680 prophetic. And 1680 divided by 7 is 240, which again is the 90 and the 150. And we're going to see in the next chapter why it's 90, why it's 150. There's a reason for that too. But right now we're just looking at saying that these are all Sabbath events, all fulfillment events. A particular amount of Sabbaths go by, and then this happens. More go by, and something greater happens. We look at from the Ark of Noah to Moses. These odd numbers, like 931 and a half years, divided by 6.9 equals, surprisingly, an even number, 135 observed Sabbaths. 931.5 is 945 prophetic years. 945 divided by 7 is 135 Sabbaths. So between the Ark of Noah to Moses, 135 years of Sabbath. Moses to Jesus, again, an odd number, 155.25, but divided by 6.9 equals 225 observed. 155, 2.5 equals 1575 prophetic. 1575 divided by 7 is again 225 observations. I'm going to give you a little hint right now. I want you to look at this 150 number. And think about the arc measurements, 1.5 by 2.5. And we also have a height, which is 1.5. So we really have the mercy seat being 1.5 times 2.5, and the height being 1.5. Well, look at this 150. And then what do you think 150 times 150 is? It's 1.5 times 1.5 is 2.25. And you're going to see that these are all tied together in such a beautiful way. But long story short is, right now, I don't want to get too far ahead. Every one of these 69 based observed covenant events are exactly 7 prophetic events. And as you go through, the big one is the one from Adam to Jesus. 4,140 years divided by 6.9 is 600 observed. Well, 4,140 observed is equal to 4,200 prophetic. And again, all you got to do is divide 4,140 by 6.9 and times that number by 7, and you get 4,200. Well, what's 4,200 divided by 7? 600. Look at that number, 600 years of Sabbaths have been at the very time that Jesus comes. Remember, after 600, what's the next? You're into the beginning of the 7th. Exactly 4,200. You know, this is all about the reconciliation between God and man. Man was created on the 6th day. On the 7th day was the Sabbath of fulfillment, the Sabbath day, the covenant fulfillment. The first number, when you're going to try and reconcile two numbers, 6 and 7, the very first time you can reconcile that is at 42. 6 times 7 is 42. There's all kinds of things that are happening here. But observe first that my maid is here. Just 1 second. Stay over. No, stay over. I'll be right there. Sure. I'll be there in about half an hour. The front end? Yeah, thanks. I'm just gonna ask Sandy, can you hear me? Have I been muted this whole time?
Um, we hear you now.
Did you hear me through the
You
last?
Yeah.
you had a call or something. We hear you
Yeah.
now.
Sorry, what's that?
You unmuted after your call. I don't know if you said something the last couple of minutes. You were over by the
No,
window.
I had someone banging on the door here. It was the maids for anyway. So, but you've heard everything I've said so far, right?
Until you went to the
Yes.
door.
Okay, that's what I want to make sure. Okay, so let's carry on here. So we have 4140 to 4200. Is 600 Sabbaths have been fulfilled. 600 times 7. And so that's, yeah, 600 years of Sabbaths have been fulfilled. Observe that each covenant event from Adam to Jesus occurred exactly at the time a specific number of Sabbaths have been observed. We have already observed in particular the Ark of Noah timeline and its relationship with the weekly Sabbath. We saw even clearer in the 2520 prophetic years from the Ark of Noah to the atoning ministry of Jesus, a direct relationship to the 7 year Sabbath of 360 days times 7, when the earth was to receive its rest. Now, this is something that's pretty incredible. Observe that Noah's name means rest. When did the flood occur? It occurred in the 600th year of his life. What do we have here? 600 Sabbaths. 600 year of his life. And that the atoning ministry of Jesus began exactly after man had observed 600 years of Sabbath year rest from Adam to Jesus. That doesn't mean that man always observed them or that man didn't fall out of the covenant, but those were available, those were set aside by God from Adam to theirs, 4,200 sevens, which is 600 sevens. And that's not an accident that Noah's name is rest, or that it happened exactly in the 600th year of his life. God is always teaching, always revealing, always showing things to people that thirst, that how it's related and how all of this is related, and how all of it came from him. The 4,200 years foreshadows Daniel's 42 months as well. 42 months, 4,200 years. Because remember, as time is always observed in the same way, so they're going to end up being related somehow, the 42 months, 4,200 years. And we'll see that in the next chapter, as we'll soon observe more clearly. The Jubilee represents the accumulation of a series of Sabbaths. Every 7 years, the people of God would observe 1 year of weekly Sabbath days. Every Jubilee, the people of God will have observed 7 years of weekly Sabbath days. On the Day of Atonement, after 49 years, marks the start of the 50th year of Jubilee, when all debts are forgiven regarding the land and the people. But this 50th year, however, is also the first year of the next 49-year cycle. So it goes from fulfillment to fulfillment without interruption. The atoning ministry of Jesus began after the equivalent of 84 jubilees of year between Adam and Jesus. 4,200 divided by 50 is 84. So this is equivalent to 7 jubilees of years for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. This also relates to the prophetic 1,260 days. The crown event, height times 1.5. We begin to see this more clearly when we observe the crown given at the height of the Ark of the Covenant. Thus far, we have been focused on the 1.5 by 2.5 pattern given for the mercy seat and its direct fulfillment in the biblical covenant event, timeline in the Ark of Noah and atoning ministry of Jesus. But in observing the ark, we are given an additional dimension. The height of the ark was to be 1.5. It is to be topped with a crown all around. This is a direct prophetic reference to the return of the Lord in all of his glory as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. It also is foreshadowed in the Day of Atonement ceremonies, whereby the anointed high priest made the atonement in the humble white linen robe. That's when the blood was sprinkled on the mercy seat, when he was in a white robes of humility. And we emerged to bless the people and assure them of the acceptance of God, or by God, of the sacrificial substitute given for their redemption. He was to put on again his royal robe of majesty and his crown. So, the atonement was made in humility. Once it was accepted, and once he went out to bless the people and to prove to them that the atonement had been accepted, he was in his royal robes. So the mercy seat points directly to the atoning event at the ministry of Jesus that began in 27 AD. The crown event points directly to the return of Christ 1.5 times after the mercy seat, because it's 2.5 times 1.5, and then we have this other dimension of the crown event at 1.5, the height of it all. Just like the Jubilee is the height of the Sabbath after Sabbath after Sabbath, and this crown event is the height of the whole Ark of the Covenant. When we multiply the 4,140 years by 1.5, we arrive at 6,210 observed years. This lands in the lifetime of most of today's generation. Specifically, it is a period of time that begins in 2027 and spans 69 years from his return, or 69 years where his return can be at any time therein. So this last brick, everything when you multiply the 4140 by 1.5, that period begins only 2 years from now, 2027. And from the first day to the 69th day, he could return. We'll get more into that later on, but I'm just saying we do not seek to know the hour or day of his return, and this has not been specifically revealed in our observation of the tabernacle pattern. But what is certain and what is revealed and demonstrable in the observation of the tabernacle pattern is that generation that is living beginning in 2027 is the capstone generation, the final stone in the tabernacle pattern revealed to Moses. The 6,210 observed years equals 6,300 prophetic, which is 126 years of jubilees going back to Adam, where the Lord's covenant people have longed to be free of sin, evil, and death. This 126 years of jubilee is also a reference to the 1260-day prophecy of Daniel, and we'll see how all these times come together. In the next chapter, we'll begin to see all of this even clearer as we continue our observation. Note, for example, that Enoch was the 7th generation and born 621 years from Adam, and he walked with God until the Lord took him. Just as 6,210 years is 10 times 621, and the time foretold for the 7th generation of the book of Revelation to herald the glory of the return of the Lord, who will take all of his people that are alive at the time with him at his return. The more that we observe the tabernacle pattern, the greater the promised blessing that we receive simply by following his instruction. Noah and Moses were obedient to not deviate from the revealed pattern. What about you and me? Do we have the courage to answer the Lord's calling to the final generation? To take the time to continue to digest the book and observe, obey, and keep the things the Lord desires to reveal to us, so that we can be the light that was foretold by Daniel of a specific group of end-time people? Or will we allow the fear of what others may think or the cares of the world to keep us from committing the time and resources we have been given to participate in this final evangelism? Each must answer this on their own. It takes courage. It's a courage that only comes through faith and belief, and faith only comes through the hearing of the Word of God. We began this chapter with the objective of continuing to observe the tabernacle pattern and that the Lord revealed to Moses, specifically to more closely observe the Ark of the Covenant, as well as its role and relationship to the biblical covenant timeline and the Sabbath observations. So here's our key takeaways. This chapter outlines a prophetic relationship between the Ark of the Covenant, the Sabbaths, Jubilee, holy days, and the crown of the Ark and the return of Jesus, emphasizing their significance to the end-time generation And here are the key points. Number one, the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark symbolizes God's presence, his divine kingship, and his authority. It contains the tablets of the covenants or the commandments, Aaron's rod that budded, and a pot of manna, representing God's law, the priesthood, and his provision. The mercy seat atop the ark is where the atonement was made, prefiguring Christ's sacrificial death. The Sabbath of Jubilee, the weekly Sabbath observed every seventh day, commemorates God's rest after creation and symbolizes our rest in the Lord and redemption through his works. The 7-year Sabbath cycle and the Jubilee every 50th year emphasize rest, liberation, and restoration. The Jubilee year, proclaimed on the Day of Atonement, is a time of forgiving all debts and freeing all slaves, symbolizing ultimate redemption and restoration through Christ. The holy days, including the Sabbath, Passover, Day of Atonement, are appointed times given by God for worship and remembrance of his covenant. These days serve as memorials of past covenant fulfillments and rehearsals for future fulfillments, pointing to Christ's redemptive work, and his return. The biblical covenant fulfillment event timeline from Adam to Jesus precisely matches the pattern revealed to Moses for the observance of holy days. The Ark timeline from Adam to Noah is 1,656 years. The mercy seat timeline from Ark of Noah to the atoning ministry of Jesus is 1.5 times the Ark timeline at 2484. The total mercy seat timeline length from Adam to Jesus is 2.5 times the Ark timeline at 4,140 years, in a direct accord to the 1.5 breadth and 2.5 length of the mercy seat where this atonement occurs. These timelines also match the Sabbath observances. The 1,656 years of the Ark fulfills the weekly Sabbaths. Every 6.9 unit of time equals a multiple of 1,656 times 24 equals 1,656. 16,924 equals 1,656, etc. Every 6.9 observed is also 7 prophetic. The 2,480 years from the Ark to the atoning ministry of Jesus is 2,520 prophetic years, fulfilling the 7th year Sabbath. 360 times 7 equals 2,520. The crown on the Ark. The crown around the Ark signifies God's kingship and authority. It prophetically points to the return of Christ as King of Kings and Lord of Lords, where every eye shall see him, those living at that time, as well as all of the resurrected, even those who pierced him, so that none can deny his glory. The return of Christ. This chapter begins to suggest that the timeline from Adam to Jesus, 4,140 years, multiplied by 1.5, points to the period beginning in 2027, indicating the generation that will witness Christ's return. This period is significant as it marks the fulfillment of the prophetic timeline and the culmination of God's redemption plan. This will be observed more clearly in the next chapter. Significance to the end-time generation. The end-time generation is called to observe and measure the tabernacle pattern, recognizing the fulfillment of God's covenant through Jesus Christ. Understanding the prophetic significance of the Ark, Sabbaths, Jubilee, Holy Days, and Crown event help the final generation prepare for Christ's return. Observing the response of Noah and Moses when the Lord called them to observe and act without any deviation to what was revealed to them emphasizes our need for faith, obedience, and readiness as this generation is tasked with the final evangelism of the world to herald the return of Christ. Observing these appointed times and understanding their prophetic fulfillment reinforces the sacred relationship between God and his people and his ever-present holiness, atonement, revelation, and presence in our lives today. In summary, the prophetic relationship between the Ark of the Covenant, the Sabbath, Jubilee, Holy Days, the crown of the Ark, and the return of Jesus underscores the importance of these elements in God's redemptive plan. For the end-time generation, this understanding is crucial for preparing for Christ's return and fulfilling their role or our role in the final evangelism of the world. We are specifically instructed First, to digest the little open book. The little open book is the covenant code, the book that Moses was instructed to write, containing the tabernacle pattern and all the ways and days revealed to Moses for our observation. The book of the covenant, the book of the law, the same book that the Lord promised Moses. Write thou these words, for after the tenor of these words I have made a covenant. Exodus 34:27. A tenor is a pattern. So write thou these words in this book of the covenant, for after the pattern of these words I have made a covenant. The covenant is made and fulfilled in direct accord to a divine pattern to demonstrate that its origin and fulfillment could only be from the Lord. I am confident you have already observed things that you never saw before, simply by partaking with me in obedience to the instructions of the Lord. And that, my friends, is the end of chapter 8. So I can take it off, share screen. I wanted to leave some time for questions and discussions, and we hit it pretty much bang on.
That was a very powerful chapter. That had a lot of proving information for people wondering about the feast and everything else and Sabbath, and it's
Yeah,
I thought pretty good.
it, you know, the way I've had to do some rewrites and different things, but the way it's all worked out, sort of building on each previous chapter has been really beneficial, and the next chapter, builds on this one. So and I'm really, enjoying the next chapter too, and then the last chapter is, a little bit of a surprise, but yeah, I'm happy that people seem to be understanding each part, whereas before maybe it was a little too hard to understand.
Like you repeat it, so it kind of brings it back and stuff. And it's like, oh, that's what it was. And then when you see the charts and you see the times and everything, it's all there. And everything is multiplied by all those, and that pattern is there, but that's because he is who he is, and he did it for a reason.
Well,
It
if you
wasn't
could
just
send
for
out a
nothing.
copy to everybody after this. Except I don't think George needs it because he already
Right.
helped me write it. So
Well, I'm happy. We finally circled back to 2016.
yeah,
You may not remember this, but off the record, I asked you then if
I
your
do.
calculations had the feasts in them, and you said yes.
Yeah,
So we
yeah.
finally circled back to where you're justifying it.
yeah. They you'll see that more and more. I mean, it's it's amazing. You look at this really already. There's two things that if you didn't know and observe the Day of Atonement, you would know nothing about this pattern of 1.5 times 2.5 or the ceremony that goes on there, how that all points to Christ. And then if you didn't observe the Sabbath, you wouldn't, you just look at this, okay, so it's 2,484 years or 2,520, and it would never click into you. But why? You'd know, okay, I see it happened, but why did it happen? And why did it happen right then? And what does that show us about what'll happen in the future and when it'll happen? Is it
Yeah.
going to God's going to suddenly change his plan and just do it at some random time? Or, as we'll be able to observe, that pattern has not stopped at the cross. All of the fulfillments, like of the 1,260 days, etc., the time when Rome lost its power and papacy took over, that pattern has just continued on right till today. And it's less obvious because nobody's really recording it or really documenting, these events. But it is, it is the time for fulfillment. And I think a lot of people, I mean, are, are open or are thirsting for the truth, and if someone can be steered to the Bible with some guidelines to show things that I was never shown, or I would have love to have, someone talk about the prophecies and different things over. But, it is what it is. I never imagined myself being someone to be writing about them, but here we are, so.
And I want to say, anybody that's listening, if when the book is finished and you have the book and you want to share it with someone, my opinion, which doesn't hold a lot, I would tell them when they start reading it, if they're like, huh? Don't even stop and try and digest it, just keep reading. And then get through it, then you can go back and then things will make more sense. Because when you first do it, it's like there's so much. It's like, no, I don't get this. That doesn't make sense. And that's not the right one. But if you follow through with all the chapters, it's like, this week there was an awful lot there. But if they read this, it'd be like, oh, okay, I see what you're saying. But they wouldn't understand the basis for it unless they read the whole thing. And all those numbers are not just thrown in there for nothing, like how long for Noah and how long was the flood and everything, all those numbers match. And it's just, to me, it's amazing. And it just proves God that much more and proves Sabbath, the feast. You can believe the Bible. It's there. You cannot make it up. Nobody could have put those numbers in there and had them come out like this.
That's kind of what I thought. It kind of validates everything that we've known. And then some.
When
And if somebody has a question when they're reading the book, they can always go to the site and look at the corresponding video.
right. And we're gonna do, when for Passover, we're gonna, do a series, and the series will be those 10 chapters. We'll do them in the 7 days, but so it'll be fresh because now you're gonna have the book and those, you can refer to just those 10, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and so it'll really tie in, that way. And I've had an opportunity because of the writing and rewriting, whatever. So now, when you do, for example, executive summary of a business report, a lot of people try and write that before they get the report started. So, I want to read I'm going to write the executive summary. They're going to write the report, and I never do that. I put a few words in for placeholders. Then I write the whole report, and only at the end, it's so easy to come back and do the executive summary, the introduction, because now you know exactly what your sales are, what this is, what that is. So you just take a little bit of information from each part and put it in the front. And so that's what I'm going to do with this book too, is that when I finish, it'll be easier to do the introduction. It'll be easier to say, because it's all, you're able to summarize what's in the book better once you've completed it all. And so the introduction that I have in right now is kind of just a placeholder. It's just kind of a, but what you really need in an introduction is to tell people what it's about, why that benefits them, what what you're going to talk about. Then you talk about it, and then at the end you summarize and say, here's what I said we're going to talk about, here's what we talked about, and everybody's understands it better. So yeah, we this is kind of a work in progress where together we're going through the studies, and we're providing these written PDFs only to our support group because they're just really more of a gift for right now, to a way of saying thank you. But in the end, there'll be a very concise book, and that'll be available for very readily available. So
Put Otter, the software Otter onto it, and it'll write the summary for you.
what's that?
Otter software, do you know of that?
Oh yeah,
Yeah, put that in there and it'll write the summary for you.
yeah. That's yeah. I'm old fashioned. I'd rather do it myself.
No mistakes that way either.
Yeah. But yeah,
I'm curious to see, when the book is out and when it's starting to be, out in the general public, how the I don't know, the other ministries or the evangelicals that have all these other timelines and all these other things that they've thrown in,
yeah.
how they're gonna react, because you can't argue with your timeline.
No, I know. I mean, I mean, people will at first because they won't have read the whole, but once, because they always do. I've made this presentation several times, and one of the first things that comes up is your timeline's off. Your timeline's wrong. And it's like, okay, well, I know that everybody has a timeline, that everyone is in a serious study at all has a timeline that's within 200 years of each other. It's from 4,000 to, to 4,100 to 4034. And if you really think about it, though, it all starts at the cross, and they all have the idea, which is the right idea, that a day for 1,000 years, 1,000 years for a day, that something's going to happen right after the sixth completes, and it's the seventh that's when the Lord will return. And I mean, there's good reason for it. You look at what I just showed you on the 4,200. That's 600 Sabbaths exactly. And halfway through that week, Jesus, was crucified, and but it was exactly then when he came, 607. So, but we learn through this observation a little bit more precisely when that would be, what generation would be. But the point is that you that these timelines. So the ministry began at 27 AD, and then it ended in, and depending on people's calculation, 30 AD or 31 AD, or 3.5 years later anyway. So that was the cross. So that means exactly 2,000 years from then would be somewhere between 2027 and 2031. So most people, why they have a smaller number like 4,000 or whatever, or certain numbers, whatever, is to match up with that event being, the 6,000. But I know from all of the study and everything else that it all kinds of works out in the wash in the end. They'll all be right. Their timeline might be off a little bit, 100 years, 150 years, but because of the way that prophecies works, and because of the difference between a prophetic year and an observed year, then it's going to work out that everybody's kind of on the right track. So it should be easy for them to accept these timelines because they're just going to agree with 90% of what they say. But some people
There is
just,
the one, I guess, small minority that says his ministry was only 70 weeks,
yeah,
not 3.5 years. So that'll put it way off.
yeah. Well, you're going to have, and a lot of people are very prideful, and they just stick to, they learned it from somebody, and
Right.
they stick to that, and they won't,
Mhm.
and they just refuse to listen to anything. You can't do anything about that, But what you
And,
can do is offer, offers to debate, either, via video or internet, to debate somebody and say, okay, well, let's discuss this timeline versus that timeline. My expectation is that the layman and the regular person is going to be very excited, to look at this and to read this and to take it in. I showed my dad just what we were talking about, the 2,520, and he was anti-Christian, and so I showed him in a McDonald's, and just that one thing, and he said, "Is this in the Bible?" And I said, "Yes," and he said, "You have to show people this." Like he was just really blown away by that. It was that could be observed. So, but I do think churches and certain people, groups or whatever, are going to be against it and say, "Oh, don't read this. It's time setting, or it's this, or it's that." But that really doesn't have much effect on what people do. Sometimes it makes them more curious to read it. So anyway, we'll see. The good thing
There's
is,
no time setting because it's within a generation, and I mean that's a lot of years. You're not saying which one. I do hope it's at the beginning.
yeah,
I don't want it to be at the end where I'm gone to sleep, but if it is, it is. But I think it's going to be sooner, and it's just to me very exciting because you hear it and you know it, but it's like, yeah. But when
Yeah,
you see it this way and have all this proof, and you can see those were real, Elijah, Ezekiel, Noah,
yeah.
all of them, all their Moses, all of those numbers,
And you
however you
think,
came up
yeah,
finding those numbers, you said God gave them to you, was like, I mean, showed them to you. It was like, what a pattern.
the thing is, I mean, think about Noah or Moses. I mean, you're given this pattern, you're told not to deviate it, in any way. And
Right.
he did it, but he saw certain things, but he didn't know what it was all leading to. Like he didn't know the exact year that Jesus would come, or any of that. He just built the pattern, but he did it because he was obedient and he was ready. You know, he
And
in fact,
wise at the end, and here we are. We're
yeah,
getting all
in
of it put
fact,
together to make
he
sense.
was he was like Peter, where he was so anxious to please the Lord and to rescue his people that he had his own exodus 40 years in advance, but no one would follow him. He killed the slave master, and then he had to flee on his own. So he was really exuberant about that. And then he got to be older, and then he was worried about going back there. Look, I couldn't do it when I was a young man. I'm going to do it now at 80. But and like I said with Peter, like he was so on fire for Jesus, the first to call him the Christ, and pulled out his sword to defend him, and yet he denied him at the cross, and he was shattered by all that. But the Lord used him like he used Moses. He restored him and made him the head of the church. But these all just obeyed. They didn't know what their role was going to be, or they didn't know. They just were told something, revealed something. They obeyed it, and it turned out to be, what we read about today. There are our heroes, or our like David or whatever. He spoke to the Lord, and the Lord spoke to him. So, in our generation, just the only thing we're actually told to do, instructed to do, is to go measure this pattern, and then to go evangelize. So I would imagine that the critics that I'd say 99.9% would be people that don't measure the pattern and don't go out and evangelize anything more than they've been doing for the last 50 years. They don't deliver a new message. They don't deliver, the fulfillment of the covenant. They don't press the point that Jesus is coming, in our generation, coming soon. They just do the same thing they've been doing for 100 years. Why, like when I go to a Bible study, and they start pulling out stuff from 50 years ago, I immediately, my eyes roll up and think, oh no, it's going to be another one of these studies I've heard 25 times before, the exact same thing. What have we studied this? What did we study this week about those same texts? Like when I do a Bible study, or my wife does, or whatever, and you're giving it to, the job of doing the Bible study for the next week. I don't rely on a commentary from 20 years ago. I might refer to that and give me a good background, but I study those texts and I pray, and I'm always so blessed. And so is my wife. I've seen her too. To be able to share something that hasn't been shared before, and seeing things in different ways, and it's a fresh anointing of the Lord, of His Word. Things that He just shows you while you're studying. It's always more of a blessing to study for being a teacher of a Bible lesson, because you're shown more things and blessed with more things than you could have ever hoped for. So anyway, I'm just seeing.
Well, it's Michael Rood is one of those that has the ministration of Christ being 490 days. And he went in his book, which I have, and I did a PowerPoint years ago showing that, it can't be just 490 days. It was 1,260 days, 3.5 years.
Yeah.
And it's the same way with the people who have the Wednesday crucifixion date. And the first time I heard about that is on my trip to Israel. And they had they had to change the 27 AD to 31 AD to a different date because Christ was crucified on Passover.
Yeah. Well,
And that's all is, and those people, that's all to meet their agenda.
yeah, oh, it is.
Exactly right.
That's the point, is that these expertises are developed, and then the rest of their life it's an agenda and a whatever.
What you probably see is, much like Pharaoh, their hearts will be hardened.
Yeah, it is, because you end up,
Yeah.
it's like the Pharisees. They started off well intended. They wanted to make sure that the scriptures were followed, et cetera, et cetera. The Sadducees were very corrupt. They were corrupting the temple priesthood and selling it off for money and different things. But the Pharisees ended up being worse. And they ended up taking over sole interpretation of the Bible, was given to the scribes, even when they erred. And they wanted to change it all and take it away from the priesthood to themselves. So they had to change days of observance and ways, and pretty soon they made the Sabbath so burdensome. There's 640 statutes, I think, for observing the Sabbath. So they took what was a simple paragraph command and made volumes of books this thick of how to observe the Sabbath.
Yeah. They put up fences to hopefully protect the people.
Right.
Since they stopped them.
But really what they're doing is having you to interpret all these things, having you depend on them for
Right.
the interpretation of the Sabbath. Okay, how many feet can I walk? How can I go from Joe's house to John's house without breaking the Sabbath? Okay, well, you got to go do this, you got to do that. These crazy things, and it's supposed to be this delight. And I think the same thing happens. Well, and I think it does happen in modern day. We get so focused on specific worship rituals or whatever, as opposed to just. I mean, I've had people, where you come into church and they take off their shoes. They're barefoot because, oh, we're in the sanctuary and I got to take off your shoes, and just different things where, if you're coming in as a novice, as someone who's never been in a church before or whatever, Paul talks about, someone should observe like clear music, clear instruments, like people that know God, that preach God, that you're there to learn, you learn something, not all a bunch of clanging and clutter and this over here and that over there. And that's what happens if the music is off, if this ministry is, prayer ministry, and they're all unrelated to each other, and each one's just trying to push their own thing. So yeah, it's nothing better than to go to a good church that has that follows, good gospel music, good Bible study, good pastor, give a sermon. It's almost getting to be so rare these days that you can't even find one.
Well, what happens is, I know the last few times I was doing things in churches, I actually got upset with one church. I said, you start at 11 o'clock and you let me get up to preach at 11:50 and you want me out here in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
What's the point?
Yeah. Yeah. I used to volunteer at an old age home to speak to, their people once a week, and but it was just before lunch. Boy, wrong time to speak in an old age home. They know exactly when that lunch whistle goes. So
The other
yeah.
thing I was going to tell you, I read something that I thought interesting, and we reverse it. According to the Bible, you're supposed to obey, and then you'll understand.
Right.
We want to understand before we obey.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. That's exactly right. I mean, yeah, it's exactly right. I mean, I'm sure when Noah started building that ark, he had no idea what, what the
Well,
end was gonna be.
Barb said this morning we were listening to something on it, and she goes, "What did he think he was doing? I mean, come on, build it up at the top of a mountain.
Yeah,
There's nowhere near the ocean.
He
There's-
didn't know what a boat was.
yeah. Yeah,
I mean, that's obedience.
absolutely.
Well, I bet a lot of people that are Seventh-day Adventists or keep the seventh day, holy, that it is not a joy for them. They think that they have to do it to go to heaven. And that's the wrong reason to observe the Sabbath.
Yeah. Well, that's why a lot of people that are like that, it's their mission in life to go to people that worship on Sunday and just argue and beat down beat them over the brow about why they're wrong and why they're right. And then that's not a way they're going to win anybody over. By because they're usually very ineffective at presenting the truth.